Karen, and we're going to turn our meeting over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Great to be here. Thank you it's always a privilege to be invited anywhere. I hope that you all feel that way when you're walking to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. So if you want to open up your big book, the people that are here in the room, live meetings, yay. Right? And on the first page, it just has that word, Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Karen. I am an alcoholic. I have a sobriety date. It's September 6, 1989. I have a sponsor who knows she's my sponsor. I have a home group. I sponsor women and try to stay in the middle of those three legacies and being that dot, which I really didn't like being at the beginning of all of this. You know, and I've come to find out that there were so many things that I was so sure about that I was absolutely wrong about. And I got to learn it through this book and my sponsor and through you, that my view on things, that I have an illness that I didn't know how sick I was, that I had a perception about things that were not based in the truth, that selfish and self-centered is the root of my troubles. And through this learning process, after I set down that drink and remained abstinent, I began to learn some things about me. And one of the things I can tell you is that I am not naturally inclined to seek a spiritual solution. The spiritual solution is what we seek. And that sounds totally backwards. But I think alcoholism in itself, it doesn't make any sense. So why on earth would our solution make any sense? Because we're just simply separated from the power that works. And to sum up, if I look at what happened in my life and what my choices were, I would always be looking on the outside for an explanation of why I felt that way about what happened. It was Steve's fault, it was Amy's fault, it was whoever's fault, never mine. Because if I could apply a rational reason to the situation at hand, maybe I could get by. And it never lasted long enough. It wasn't sustainable, they call it. It didn't have a foundation. And inevitably I would turn to a drink or something else to make myself feel better. And in this book I began to learn why I did that. You know, that I have an allergy to alcohol. When I pick up a drink, the drink takes me, asks for the second, demands a third, and off I go. And I don't mean to do that. And then I have an obsession of the mind, meaning anything will trip me up and I'll just be zoned on making that right. You know, and underlying all of that is an ego that's upside down and has become quite an inferiority complex. I used to think, but it was really just an ego out of control. And no way to fix any of this. And then the choices I made, begin to pile up. And then comes that day when you're faced with a decision. Either you die or you live, and I call it, I have a brother that's just recently entered into treatment. And, we were talking and I was saying to him, okay, here's really the choice. It boils down to this. You want to be dead man walking or spiritual intoxication? Which one would you like to learn about? And that brought me to the book, being in that place. And on that first page, it just says Alcoholics Anonymous. And for me to be able to help you or to be able to explain to somebody else, because the whole deal that Bill learns about, we're going to talk about that in the prefaces, and really slams home, is I have a job in it to show you what I've learned. To show you what I've learned, to demonstrate what's happened to me can happen for you. It doesn't matter if you're 1 day clean or you've got 300 days clean or 3,000 or you're 33 years or 1 minute. Doesn't matter. There's a purpose and a plan into what you know more than that next person sitting by you. And so can you say, what is Alcoholics Anonymous? I'll give you a hint. If you cited the preamble, you kind of can tell somebody, well, what is Alcoholics Anonymous? And I had a sponsor who just drilled this stuff into me. If somebody says to you, what is it? What would your answer be? And I can tell you today that it's a spiritual program that brought about a change in me that I didn't even know I needed, right? And that I needed a complete overhaul, a new way of looking at things. Because the way I was looking at things and what was happening is I was at a dead-end stop where there's nowhere else to go. So a revolutionary change happened, and we hear that word in our literature. But if I can explain that's what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me, perhaps it can do it for you. So I hope you have an explanation like that. So we turn the page and it comes on to this whole list of other books. And I never like to, I like to, when I talk about the book, before I get into the preface and the forewords and all that, I like to point this out, that they're here for a reason. You know, I am an absolute student of the big book. I love it. It's transformational for me. I call it the greatest love story ever told. But things that are in the book are also explained in other books that we check out. Like the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions will enhance an understanding of what you learn in the big book. They talk about alcoholics comes of age. They'll give you some history. I love the history of AA. The silver threads of connection. And the more I know about it, the more I like to talk about it, the more knowing that right here in New Jersey, we're in the footprint of where AA really started. I mean, it's got so much amazing energy that AA comes of age. It gives you the brief history of what happened and why is it coming of age? Why are they talking about that? Because you'll hear these buzzwords about, I don't know, right? And then it goes on to talk about As Bill Sees It. What a wonderful composite of literature that all come from Bill that you can look up. Hey, I'm really having trouble with honesty today. So I can look it up in the index and it gives me a couple of readings to go look at. And maybe by the end of that reading, I'll have a new perspective on maybe something else I can do different. So this is all literature here to help you, enhance you, grow your spiritual life, and your ability to talk with others. Because we meet people along the way, all facets of life come here, and I don't know your background and you don't know mine, but we have one common problem, you know, and we can talk about that together. And I can say, hey, you know, I can refer to a story in the back of the book, or I can tell you about something that I read in a pamphlet. It really helps to give it credibility. The more you know the literature, the more credible the program is for the next person who comes and talks to you. You know, and then the next page is Alcoholics Anonymous. This is where we begin our work, you know, and a lot of people say, oh, the blank page, you know, you don't know nothing. That's usually how I say it. And I'm going to tell you, the blank page is here for you to write your story. That blank page that we are entering into, this is your story. Because the book Alcoholics Anonymous is experiential, and it's meant to be your experience. It's meant to be, well, did I feel like that? Did I look like that? Did I do that? You know, and it's a story of experience. So when I talk about the textbook, I like to bring that in because it might not be your experience, it might be the next guy's, but the next sentence might be yours. So we learn about Alcoholics Anonymous, and it tells us that many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism, and they bring in that word, and people will say, you can't recover. And I said, yeah, we do. There's a definition in here. It's about the seemingly hopeless state of mind and body that we recover from. And we have a daily reprieve contingent on what we do with that, you know, how are we working through that. And so that's our first promise of hope on the very first page. That first promise says, many thousand have done this. So set aside everything you think you know for a new experience with God in this book, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to stay away from that drink or drug or whatever it is that brought you in here and find a new hope. So it brings you an unbelievable hope. And now, in our fourth edition, and I came in, it was the third edition, and we had the circle and triangle in there, and it was removed from our literature. And I do want to talk about that circle and triangle because it is, it's like sacred art. You know, if you can picture, and if you don't have one in your book, draw a triangle and then put a circle around it. And that circle that around it is a symbol that connects mind, body, and spirit to the power. And that triangle within it represents the three parts of self that we come here absolutely separated from. And our three legacies in our program that join us back in, mind, body, spirit, and it comes in through unity, service, and recovery. So when you see that triangle and you can understand what that means, and you're simply the dot in the middle of it. So, and we're promised on the bottom of this page, you know, it says, if I take action in those three areas, I am going to be whole. Imagine that. Me, this crazy person who walked in AA that couldn't put two sentences together. I couldn't think straight. It blown up my family all over the place. My job was a wreck. My husband had walked out. My marriage had fallen apart. I was getting along with nobody. My family wouldn't return my phone calls because, you know, I was a drunk dialer, you know, one of them. They get sick and tired of us. You know, our alcoholism wears people out, and I had worn them out. But they promised me that if I just tried this on, and I was within that triangle, and I would become whole. And I'm like, okay, I don't understand any of this, but I began to focus in on the unity that we walk into a room like this, and there's people like us here, and that's the fellowship. So, and in the fellowship, right, we're guided by 12 traditions in the fellowship. So the fellowship, there's certain things that happen in an AA meeting, and our one primary purpose is the unity of our group. And we're here for the next suffering, that person that comes in. And it might be somebody who's been here for a while. So we keep our eyes open for that. But the guidance for that fellowship and that unity and keeping that door open, and thank God we had Zoom during the pandemic, and now our meetings are reopening, so we get to feel the energy of that divine presence that comes into our circle of seeking something different, right? And then we get on the other side of that triangle, and it's about service. You know, and service is really important. It takes care of my spirit, right? Just like unity takes care of my body, I start to be able to relax. I'm starting to feel better. I've stayed away from a drink. I'm going to a meeting. You're doing all those kind of things. So service is found in carrying the message. What message am I carrying, right? That's why we're here in a big book study, so we can carry the message that there's only one solution, and how that's happened for us. One solution that's customized just for you, right? So are we taking other people through the work? Do I have a home group? And I taking other people through the steps? Have I been through the steps? Have I completed the steps? These are all parts of that triangle that are going to make you feel like you've been rocketed, you know, that your life is worth living. And on the bottom is the recovery. And that's the 12 steps. And again, there's 12 principles and 12 steps. And we go through them, and they build a ladder up to wholeness. So it's really important that this mind, body, spirit that is treated, if you want to call it like a treatment plan, is treated through the 3 legacies of our group. And I know this is a 3 legacy group. My home group's a 3 legacy group, and we pay attention to those 3 things. And we continue to learn. You know, there isn't, like I said, sometimes I have an idea that simply isn't the truth, but I've hung on to it forever. And I've learned about how old ideas are getting me into trouble. So on the next page, we're not even in numerals yet. It talks about how many editions there are, when it was copyrighted. And this, you know, if you're new here and haven't been around, this is incredible information, because the big book in sales is second only to the Bible. We're in the Library of Congress. That's how important this literature, they found this literature to be. You know, here I come in with this snarky little attitude of mine, because my illness is like no other illness. There's really nothing wrong with me, you know. I don't know I don't know. You know, and I have all these opinions about it. And I'll say, but wait a second, right here it says, we're in the Library of Congress. There must be something outstanding about the information that's in here that has lasted this long and has helped so many. So that's what we're about to learn. And it outlines all of what we're about to learn on the table of contents. And I want to go, and if you have a pen, mark it up, because you can absolutely, if you're like, what did she say and where was that? You'll know where to go, because it took me a while to be able to see in these table of contents how the higher power shows up, and that is totally written in the form of a textbook. You know, and it's going to follow a sequence. One sequence is built on another. And I don't know about you, but when I was in school, particularly in college, you know, I'm older, so there's Cliff Notes. Right now you can cheat on Google or whatever you do. There are Cliff Notes, and I knew if you read the first paragraph of the Cliff Note and the last paragraph, you kind of got the gist of what you were supposed to be learning. Well, the big book's like that too. Like Bill must have known when he wrote it that they had people like me in it. So if you read the first chapter, the first paragraph of the chapter, it's going to set forth what that chapter is going to be about. And the last paragraph of that chapter is going to sum it up. But I have to tell you, don't skip the middle. You really don't. But it does give you some idea as an overview. All right, so we're going to talk about the preface, the foreword to the first edition, the second, third, and fourth. And they say they're writing a fifth. We'll have to see what happens. And just to briefly outline this for you, so the doctor's opinion is going to be about step 1. Without the doctor's opinion, I don't think our book would have had any legitimacy. I think what the doctor has written in our book legitimizes what's going on for us. It says the doctor's opinion. For years, it didn't say Karen's opinion. You know what I'm saying? A doctor wrote it who wasn't one of us, who observed us, who witnessed what people like us with chronic alcoholism or whatever stage you're in, and helped to identify what was going on with us. Thank God he knew that. And you know, Bill Wilson comes along, to bring in a little bit of history. Bill Wilson comes along, and on his 4th treatment, he has his spiritual awakening. I think it was his 4th treatment, and he's like, Dr. Silkworth, what is wrong with me and stuff? I don't know, but hang on to it. Hang on to what you just learned, because something's different about you. So what's going on with Bill is he's putting together experiences that he knows about. In the meantime, you know, you're talking about a guy, very intelligent, grew up in Vermont, lived in Vermont. His mom gets divorced from his dad. He splits. They never really talk about the abandonment he had as a kid, you know, and he just was always feeling out of place, always trying to, you know, come to the top so you pay attention to him. Sounds like the same kind of self-esteem issue I did. If you just liked me, I'd be okay. It wouldn't come from the inside out. And he talks about these experiences. So along the way, he's got this depth of a soul that's missing something's not there. And he starts to seek it. You know, and he never really drank. It was during the period of time in our history where, you know, the temperance movement was going, and he kept, you know, signing those things. And his grandfather, brought up by his grandfather, if you've ever been up to the Wilson house, you can actually picture what's going on. And he wasn't a God-fearing man at all. You know, so he didn't really know. He just knew this. Would I ever get over the mountain? Would I ever have a life? And he starts to meet people. He goes to a high school in the next town over, into Manchester, and he meets Abby Thatcher. And they become best of buds. You know, I'm always thinking that's curious. My best of buds were people like me, you know. They'd go out and party like me, you know. They'd drink like me. I always drank more than they did, and they eventually left. But we started out good. And he found those people too. And they start to adventure together. You know, then Abby introduces him to Lois Wilson now. And Lois, they had a family house up in Manchester. And this family house, the summer home, they met down at Emerald Lake at an outing. And, you know, they hooked up, and no one liked Bill. His parents didn't like Bill. Lois was older. And they end up getting married. He goes off to war, comes back. They wrote lots of letters about that. If you ever go up to Stepping Stones, you have the opportunity to read kind of the history that happens. So he's starting his life out, and things are going okay. He goes down to New York. He becomes a stock speculator. He comes up with some really grandiose ideas. And not to take anything away, because we only have a short period of time, he's feeling that he had arrived, like the outside was proven that he's worth it. And I know that feeling. I know that it looks good, it's okay. And for years, I saw it, the outside. You know, I had a beautiful home, and, you know, I was married to this guy. He was actually, we snuffed the life out of each other. That's a whole nother story. But at the time, it was my knight in shining armor, you know. And he worked in the city, and he worked on Wall Street. So, you know, I had it made, I thought. You know, and I had the kids at the house and the dog, everything. Something was always missing. I was always chasing more. I didn't understand that about me, but I understand it today about alcoholics. So Bill was of that kind too. He's always chasing more. And he talks about what happens as he's chasing more, and alcohol becomes part of a greater part of his life, which it did for me too. The allergy takes hold and you can't stop. You know, and it led to the silver threads of connection. I believe that God just saw fit at the time to connect the people. You know, you have Dr. Bob, he's also from Vermont. He's up in Vermont, and he's doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and he ends up in Akron. You know, long story short, he's in Akron. He can't stop drinking. Then there are other people. Then you've got, you know, Bill's friend Ebby, who's, you know, just up on a bender. His dad was the mayor of Albany. He was just an embarrassment, so they send Ebby up to their summer home up in Manchester, Vermont, and he used to go paint it, and he goes and paints it, and he can't stop drinking, all kinds of antics. You know, 3 antics, you're caught, you're going to be thrown into jail. So they're going to throw him into jail, and a couple people get wind of that. And this guy, Roland Hazard, and his friend, they go and rescue Ebby, and they say, we'll take care of him. They had just learned over here about the Oxford Group program. The Oxford Group program was out there helping drunks, right? So all of a sudden, when you look at the people, the players, they're being moved into one spot, which happened the day after Mother's Day, when Bill and Bob met and had a conversation, when one alcoholic was talking to another, and it started to click for Bill. He knows a program of recovery. He'd been introduced to the Oxford Group. He knows that he needs a spiritual experience. He learned that from Carl Jung. We know that we suffer from a disease, dis-ease, that when we take a drink, the drink takes us because a phenomenon happens for people like us. And so Bill was the first person that put it all together. I think that's kind of amazing. And all through those silver threads of connection. So who could have organized that? I don't know. So we talk about that, and in the preface they begin to introduce the writing of this book. And when they talk about what happened in the first edition, the very beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous. My favorite edition is the second, so I'll spend a little time in there. And the third edition and the fourth edition. And then we go on to see it. So the doctor's opinion is going to put forth for you the step one, supported with Bill's story, which is the greatest 12-step story ever written about what happened, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like for me today. That's his story in the Bill story. And we try to identify with that. People break it up into parts, who knows, right? And then in the next we have There Is a Solution and more about alcoholism. So there is a solution. What it teaches us in there is about the obsession of the mind. So those that gathered together to write this book looked at that and said, we are suffering from one thought only. I cannot get out the thought that maybe I'm a periodic drinker, maybe I'm an everyday drinker, but I got an obsession of the mind that I cannot get rid of, right? And then more about alcoholism takes that a step further and begins to talk about the unmanageability of our spirit. So there's stuff that happens for people like you and me who are driven here to sit here to learn a little bit more about what's going on with me. And I think it was so important that they took this unmanageability piece and really focused it on it in the story about more about alcoholism. That it was so important that we pay attention to our thinking because it's what's caused the unmanageability of our spirit. And when we can connect it together, we have a really good shot at hearing you. Like if Steve's talking, I can actually hear him suggesting something. Mom, maybe I can try that. Instead of being the doubting Thomas, putting up all of the armor about I'm not doing that, right? Then we come into this chapter about we agnostics, who really drills down our step 2. You don't have your shades up. You do have your shades up. So when I read those shades, I went, oh, okay, that's just like that. So step 2 is a really important step for us, and it talks about that in we agnostics. There's no apology ever that you have to have for the need to have, finding, seeking a power outside of yourself. Because when I looked at step 1 and that unmanageability of my drinking, I can tell you right here and right now, I tried everything to correct it. I tried everything to change. I couldn't do it. I needed more information. So step 2 really becomes, perhaps, can I consider this? That I really need access to a solution that I didn't even know I needed. Maybe that's what that's about. So then we go on to that step 2, and how it works, talks specifically about steps 3 and 4. So, and then it brings us into action. Into action talks specifically about steps 5 through 11. 7 steps in one chapter. They spend all this time ahead of time trying to convince you and me about what alcoholism is. We say alcohol is but a symptom of an underlying illness. We'll wonder what that is, right? So how does it present itself? We see it in There Is a Solution. We see it in more about alcoholism, right? And we find a solution in we agnostics. Can I possibly just maybe, abandon everything I think I know, like this set-aside prayer says, for new experience right here, right now, with God? Maybe I can do that. Because obviously the new experience with me, I didn't get what I needed. It fell short from what I wanted. It fell short in the life I dreamt I could have. But they're telling us we can have it. We can have it back, right? So then it goes into, talks about into action 5 to 11, working with others, to wives, to family, after, to employers, are all talking about how we bring 4 through 9 into our lives. And they bring it up in carrying the message and practicing the principles that are set forth in the book, right? And then they bring it to that amazing chapter of Vision for You. At a meeting I used to go to when I was early recovery, when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, we were really taught recovery from the 12 and 12, at least most of the meetings were. There weren't a lot of big book meetings. I happened to walked into my first meeting where I met a woman who was involved with a group that were listening to Joe and Charlie Big Book Teeth from day one. So all along in my recovery, I had been introduced to the solution in a different way. So alongside that, I would go to meetings, they'd say, put that book away, you talk about God too much. And I'd be like, isn't that the purpose? Anyway, so, or seriously, right? So, but they would read the step, and they'd always be reading A Vision for You. And I discovered A Vision for You, although much more understood when I've gone through the steps, has some really cool points in the first third of that chapter, where it really lays forth, people like you and me, a vision that Alcoholics Anonymous has for you. Kind of summarized in the foreword to the second edition, but it really puts it out there. So if you're working with a newcomer and you want to get some enthusiasm rocking and rolling, go read that. It's like the first 5 pages, and there's a bunch of promises that I can tell you literally happened within the first 7 months of staying away from a drink. I experienced it, so you can help your newcomer or somebody who's not familiar with the work, who's on the ledge about this, that, or the other thing. Hey, look, at the middle of the Vision for You gives you some real pointed history about these are the way that other people had it, and once again, only the way Bill writes. And then the last part is about, we challenge you to try these things on. So when you look at it like that, that's how the big book works. It sets forth the problem, it gives us a little bit of a solution, gives us some direction, always has a promise to it, and it builds it in the next chapter. So that's what you'll be seeing as you walk through the book. The table of contents always helps me to talk about that. So now you can go find it when you're reading through it while you're going to your step study next. Next, it talks about the personal stories. And one thing I challenge you is our book was meant to be a mail order book. So there's tons and tons of stories in here. I have some absolute favorites, and I know them pretty well, and maybe you can find some favorites. So when someone's talking to you, there's a story about you, and you can bring them into the book. Or there's something that I read. Do you know that there's a prescription for a miracle? And they'll say, what are you talking about? I go read Keys to the Kingdom. And it talks about a prescription for a miracle. Are you ready for that? Or you can bring them to, fear of fear, or you can bring them to freedom from bondage, or you can bring them to stories that meant something to me that was relatable to my recovery, because each of the stories that they're chosen to be in this book are chosen specifically because they have one thing in mind: what happened and how they got to God. How that story put that person's hand in the hand of their higher power. And that's every single story. So I challenge you to get ahead and do that. All right. So at the end, on Roman numeral 10, they talked about the appendices. They outlined the traditions, the spiritual experience, the medical view. So there's a lot of information in here. How to get in touch with AA. They talk about the 12 concepts. Please hop on board to at least understand how it should be working, so you have some idea if something's not working. I can guarantee you there's probably a tradition violation, if you want to be AA police, or falling short of a concept going on, and you can have a conversation, say, hey, what's that about? Because I lost my comfort in a meeting, so something's going on for me. So it's usually one of those things. So let's talk about the preface, the very preface. So I can just state this and summarize it up as best I can, and I'll point out a few lines that tell me something really important. First, it tells me that the first part of the book is where I find the recovery. The first part of the book, the 164 pages. It's where the AA program is, right? And this is more than a book that's designed to transmit information to you. It's designed to transmit an experience. So the book is meant to be experiential. It's meant to sit down and go one-on-one with somebody else, to walk through the words. Some of the words is kind of archaic. They really aren't when you understand the root of them, but they need to be shared and talked about with somebody else. So the reason for that is the experience will lead it so it's sufficient enough for a person like me to recover from alcoholism, to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body is the purpose. So if I do try to do what it asks me to do or suggests me to do, I might have a shot at staying sober for good and for all. So far I haven't relapsed. So far the obsession to drink has left. I have real life one-on-one issues that pop in because we're human beings, right? But I need more than knowledge to stay sober for good. And what this book gave me was the experience, that I could rely on, that helped them, will help me. So it says this is the 4th edition, so it's an amazing bestseller. It goes through numbers. We have 19,000 copies in all formats. If you ever have the opportunity to go to Founders Day or go out to Akron, they have an archive there. And it has the man in the bed, stained glass window, which is absolutely beautiful. But in the hallway, when you walk into the archives, it's a very long hallway, and I would say it's almost as long as this room. On this wall, there's 3 shelves. And on the first shelf on top, there's a flag, and then a big book, and then a 12 and 12 of each country where our literature's been translated into. It is like the coolest thing. You just walk down it going, wow. This little conversation that started around a table has blown into that, and has helped that many people. Maybe I'll look at it. That arrogance of an alcoholic. Maybe, just maybe, it will work for me, right? And then in the second paragraph it goes on to say, because this book has become the basic text for our society and helps such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment about any radical changes. So therefore, the first part of this book has remained intact because it's helped so many. The second part, the stories and that stuff, they mess around with that all the time. Okay, so it once again tells me that the recovery is in the first part of the book. Okay, so then I'm going to skip down on the bottom of Roman numeral XII, which is 12. It says at the very end, remember it set forth the problem, 4th edition, appeared 16 years later, right now, I'm just going to summarize it. And it says, if you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yeah, that happened to me. Or more important, I felt like that too. I believe this program can work for me too. And my question always with the newcomers said, do you believe the program might work for you too? I'll put in a consideration. They said, well, might. At least I'm not getting a no. I'm good with might. That's willingness. Willingness can also, also it's got to be willing. It doesn't tell me my attitude has to look good. It just tells me that I need to be willing. Okay, so moving on to the forward to the first edition. There were 11 printings of the first edition, and one word was changed. It used to say ex-alcoholic in the book, but they changed it to ex-problem drinker. And the reason they did that was the realization is that only I can tell you if I'm an alcoholic or not. So rather than be labeled the alcoholic, it must come from within me, that I have fully conceded to my innermost self that that's who I am. So they changed that one word from the first edition onward. In the 11th printing of the first edition is when they changed the word. Okay, so it talks about, as the forward has appeared, we of Alcoholics Anonymous and more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And then this is the program. This is what it said. They're putting forth what's going to happen in this chapter, or, this little summary. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So that's the main purpose of the book, is to just show them what they did, so that maybe, this is what you can do too. So we recovered from the symptoms. If we ever picked up a drink, the drink would take us because we have an allergy to alcohol. This book is so appealing to many other 12-step programs. It works with them, but they don't have our allergy. But the spiritual side of the program works very well for them. So just to make sure that that word, if someone says you shouldn't say that, say, wait a second. I am recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body as long as I stay away from a drink. So it's a new idea. Down here in the bottom of that paragraph, it says, no further authentication will be necessary, meaning you don't have to go get drunk or go use or get high or go get arrested or whatever you did. You don't have to do that again to prove that this might work for you. So many don't comprehend the alcoholic as a very sick person. That was a really new idea put forth when this book was written. Alcoholics weren't viewed as sick. They were viewed as immoral. They were viewed as, if you only tried harder. Think of everything people said to you about your drinking before you got here. If you only just tried a little harder, what's wrong with you? You should quit. All of those things. Here was the first time in writing it was put forth the idea that we're a very sick person. And that really brings you pause. We're spiritually sick. And you don't start that out in the beginning. I think people would just fly away. So they start talking about, well, what does that mean? And in those three parts of self, mind, body, spirit, we can talk about how we're kind of off the beam there. How our reactions to life aren't the same. Why we do those kind of things. And the book will begin to explain it. So it says, we're sure that our way of living has advantages for all. It doesn't say our way of thinking. It doesn't say our way of drinking. It doesn't say our way of stopping drinking. It says our way of living. So we've developed through the book a way of life to approach things that we never even knew was out there for a person like me. When we get into what's wrong in the selfish and self-centered alcoholic mind of mine, I will always have alcoholic thinking. We just have a way to treat it. So then they talk about remaining anonymous, right? And we ask the press to honor that. Remember, we start to develop the preamble in this beginning of this. It says, we're not an organization in the conventional way of the word. So we're seeing our preamble that was put forth in the first edition. The preamble comes from the Constitution of the Oxford Group. So that's where they took it from. So there are no dues or fees, whatever. You see, this is our preamble, right? The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We change that to desire. We're not allied with any particular faith, sect, denomination, nor do we oppose anybody. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. So our preamble is set forth in our preface to the first edition of the book. So that comes from the Oxford Group. So where are we in time?
15 minutes.
Okay. So forward to the second edition, my favorite one to talk about. I love talking about all this stuff. So this talks about groups in Alcoholics Anonymous, what was going on from 1939 to 1955. It talks about the growth. It talks about the emergence of AA hitting towns and hamlets, and we're having writing. People are writing pen pals, and if you go up to, this is really cool. If you're ever able to go up to Stepping Stones, they have the map, and anytime they had a new group reported, they would put a white pin where that map was. On the map, they put a pin in it, and they have it up at Stepping Stone behind this glass case. And if it was a remote person who was getting sober on their own through the book and reported in, they put a green pin. And all of a sudden, you see the spread of all of these groups starting all over the world, but it was mostly the United States and Canada that you see all of these pins in the map. I'm sure you can Google it and see a picture of it, right? So, and it's going to put forth what we're going to talk about. Since the original foreword in this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. So you are part of Wholesale Miracle. And I like the fact that they use the word wholesale. That means that it's not marked up. That means I don't have to have anything extra. It is exactly what it is. There's no extra fees. There's no extra anything. It's wholesale and it's available for everybody. It says our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. First legacy. They're going to find the fellowship. They're going to find the fellowship. They're going to walk in the room. They're going to see a literature table. Maybe they'll see the shades. They're going to see a chairperson. They're probably going to see a greeter. They may or may not have coffee. Hopefully we'll resume all those things when we come in. But we'll be able to walk in and you're going to sit down and something's going to happen here. In my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, I got sober by coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was not in a detox or rehab or anything. I was directed to a meeting. And at this meeting, I walked up to the door and this guy shook my hand. And here's what happened. It was like electric. Nobody had welcomed me anywhere for a little while. And this guy shook my hand and he said, welcome home. I couldn't believe it. And then he pointed to the door and inside was a coffee pot. And there was a girl by the coffee pot. And she poured me half a cup of coffee. I talk about this because the greeter is so important in a meeting. And how do they know? You can barely sit still. And I had put down a drink the night before, so I'm still kind of shaky. And she sits down and sits me in a chair. And I was early, and I smelled the coffee filling the room, and then I felt the people coming in. And then something happens in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that happened to me that very first meeting. It's like the energy change. And the higher power comes into any meeting of two people who are trying to do a deal like this. So I took over the meeting, and I felt that. And I seek it every meeting I go to. You sit and wait. Oh, here it comes. People are coming. And you'll feel that. And that's what they're talking about here. You're going to feel that fellowship at the destination. Already continues the next 2s or 3s and 5s have sprung up in other communities. And then they talk about what happened in the 16 years since the first printing, where we've spread all over the world. And today you can travel and pick up AA and go anywhere. Can you imagine? These people would travel for hours to get to one meeting a week, right? At the bottom of that paragraph, it talks about, many of our friends encourage us by saying this is only but a beginning, only the augury, which is a word that means prediction, of a much larger future ahead. Who knew when they wrote this that we would see and we'd have our meetings on Zoom during a pandemic? Whoever knew we'd have a pandemic, right? And then they're talking about what happened. And then the spark that was to flare in that first AA group, the spark that happened in Akron, that spread to Cleveland and came into New York. And now we have 3 little towns of AA sitting there, and they counted them up, and they realized that there were 40 people sober. They couldn't believe it. And it talks about the meeting here of Dr. Bob and Bill. They talk about the experience. He talks about Evie, who walked in and knocked on his door, and Ebby just did what he was told to do, but he finished the 6 tenets, the Oxford group, we have 12 steps, they had 6 tenets. At the very end, he says, go help somebody who needs help. He thought of Bill, and he knocked on his door, and the rest is history. And Bill wanted to drink, and he drank right through the talk, but there was something different about that guy that he had known his whole life, that he had seen drunk, that he had done many antics with. He's just like observing something different, and he's listening to the story. But he's drinking, he's sitting there drinking, he's listening to the story, and something happened to him there. And it was like, think back, who was your first 12-step person when something happened and you just knew they had something that you wanted, right? So he talks about that, being convinced, right? He was convinced of the need for moral inventory, right? He was convinced, this guy, this was Ebby telling Bill, he was convinced of this. You want to read more of it, the whole story's in the book there. Helpfulness to others, right? Moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, the necessity of belief and dependence upon God. I didn't really know I needed to know any of that stuff. I didn't know it. But what's really amazing about the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous and the higher power that seems to work is, as long as I'm willing, somehow I'm learning. Somehow I'm bumping into the right person at the right time who I can hear. Somehow the experience happens to me. I'm happening in the experience. So it's just the most amazing thing. They talk about what happened to his journey, right? And what happened with Bob. Dr. Bob had never spoken to anybody like Bill who could totally relate to the problem he was having drinking. He tried many times. He couldn't stop drinking. He finally admits to his Oxford group people he's got a problem. The Oxford group people, they say, oh, thank God you can finally admit it. We're going to pray for you. And they go off on his prayers, and Bob's thinking, didn't work then. It's not going to work now. And then Bill shows up. Answer to the prayers, Henrietta Seiberling says, right? So then it's talking about the groups that are forming. And down here, though, is pretty interesting on XVII, towards the bottom of it, right? That he's saying the struggling groups placed their message and unique experience before the world. Determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of our book, right? The membership had reached about 100 men and women, and the fledgling society had been named what's now became called Alcoholics Anonymous. That's a funny story in itself, how it got named. But it mentions something really important because I think we're in one of these. It's called the Flying Blind period ended, and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. And we were very structured up until the pandemic. Now we entered into a new flying blind period. How do we run a meeting? How do we stay on mind? What do we do about our seventh tradition? What about anonymity? All of those questions have come up with our Zoom life. It rescued us in many, many ways, and it brought in people who couldn't get to meetings. But what's going to happen in this flying blind period? Well, we will see. I tell you, if God's in charge, it'll be magnificent. And we just have to be patient and open-minded about what's going on. But the flying blind period happened then, it'll happen again and again. And how resilient can we be? How will those 12 traditions and 12 steps and 12 concepts bring us as Alcoholics Anonymous and our unity to be able to be whole, to be able to bring in my grandson I swear to God that chair's for him. You know, that personality that you see in our children's children. You know, they're coming. Will we be here for them? I think we will. I do. I really think we will. But we have to pay attention to what's going on, right? So then it's talking about these exciting things that are going on, you know, that happened with the Liberty and what happened with the Saturday Evening Post, where people doubt us. They come in and see us and they realize that this is real. This is real for them, right? And that's what they're talking about. And we want money, and John D. Rockefeller, so brilliant in his way, said, no, you don't need money, you'll ruin that too. So seventh tradition is developed, right? So then we enter what they call a fearsome and exciting adolescent time. And they realize that our groups needed guidance. And they talk about this guidance. And we discover the principles on page XIX, right? 19, they talk about the principles by the individual alcoholic could live. We had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. If anything is true, what will destroy AA will be the disunity from the inside out. Just like my alcoholism destroyed me from the inside out. And we apply the steps to that. Hopefully we can apply the traditions. And I don't know about you guys, if you do the workshops with the traditions and bringing the traditions into relationship, it's the most powerful way to look at, is what I'm about to say or do for the good of my group? Well, probably not. I'm not going to say anything. You know, and if we maybe ran some ideas past that benchmark, maybe, just maybe, we would have more unity in our groups. Right, so it talks about what happens, and he literally in this second edition outlines the traditions, right? The substance of AA's 12 traditions is stated in full. It's on page 561 of the book. That none of them force rules, they're just merely suggestions, but they're absolute guidelines trusted by experience. It came out of experience of things that didn't work. You know, if I can mention anything about the steps, every single step approaches everything wrong about me to bring me to the spiritual principle that I can integrate in my life, so all of that can be turned around. So the same is kind of true of those traditions. We had to see what was wrong before we could see, well, what might we apply here and bring it to what's right. So then they talk about the acceptance. It said how we grew in leaps and bounds, you know, sticking to the traditions, sticking to that three legacy. The wide acceptance of AA was from outsiders. A lot of outsiders that helped us, ministers, friends, doctors, all of these people that saw what was going on with this Wholesale Miracle, that we could trust anything that these people say. They have found a way up and out. That unbelievable, the obsession to drink has ended for them. And I can say is removed from me. So our seeking of finding the highest of highest power also involves in our group. And that's the second edition taught me that. So the foreword to the third edition came out in 1976. It talks about the principles of the program. They changed a bunch of stories. They talked about translation into different languages, you know, and the increase in the size, and the span of the fellowship. And at the bottom of that, it sums it up again. Each day somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks to another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. Pounding it home again. Go work with others. Be with others. Expand with others, right? Then we come into the year 2000. Lots of stuff was going on in the year 2000. There's a forward to the fourth edition comes in, right? And they bring some more changes. Come off the press, right? And it mentions in here, it says the fourth edition of Alcoholics Anonymous came in November 2001 at the start of the new millennium. Everyone was freaked out about that. Since the third edition, we've got a worldwide membership of AA, nearly doubled. We are in all countries. Now they're going to emphasize something that only seems to be emphasized right here, our literature. Our literature is going to keep the glue together for us no matter where we are, whether it's in London, or it's in Asia, or it's in Russia, or it's in Ukraine, or it's in Mexico, or it's in Canada. I'm just thinking of the places that I had the privilege of speaking over Zoom during the pandemic. The literature played an important part. Some of these places can't get the literature that's readily available for us, but it says that literature played a major role in AA's growth and a striking phenomenon of the past quarter century. the explosion of translations of our basic literature in many language and dialects. So it's the literature, keeping intact the literature to share, because if I'm reading the foreword to the 4th edition from my book in English, and you're reading the foreword to the 4th edition from your book in Spanish, we're reading the same thing. So it's very important that we keep our literature intact around the world, because we're a worldwide fellowship, right? So it says the message of recovery has reached larger numbers of people and touched the lives of vastly greater variety suffering alcoholics. I mean, amazing. So the literature we have, the pamphlets. I had a sponsor who made me read every single one of them. I don't know if you guys ever touched the literature rack, but it's actually interesting. I guess if you're nerdy, it's interesting. So we had to go through each one of the literature, and I have some favorite pieces that really bring home how to talk to another person who might have that issue. So there's a lot more that you can expand upon, but the literature's there for a reason, and most of it's free, right? It says, when the phrase, "we are people who would normally not mix," page 17 of our book, was written, it referred to a fellowship comprised mostly of men and women. So we needed more to help be inclusive of others who come here. So literature is really important. So we go on, and it comes down here, and unbelievable, it talks about this. It says, while our literature preserved the integrity of the AA message, so our literature, our big book, our 12 and 12, the books that are in the front of the book that they say are AA approved, the reason they're AA approved, I always had this snarky thought. I thought it's because they made money off of it. That's not the reason. The reason that they're in the front of the book is that because they preserve the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. They preserve the message of the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, the 12 concepts that guide our fellowship. So that's why. So it says, sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship. Here we go. Do you believe this? Written in 2001. Taking advantage of technological advances, for example. How would they have known? AA members with computers can participate with meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country and around the world. And in any meeting, anywhere, AAs share experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics. Modem to modem, face to face, AAs speak the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity. Thank you so much for letting me share.
Thanks so much.